They thought they could just quietly downgrade me and I'd disappear without a fuss. But they forgot one crucial thing. What I hold in my hands isn't just authority, it's leverage. And once I decide to use it, there's no turning back for them. I've spent 3 years building this department from the ground up, streamlining operations that saved the company millions. Now they want to replace me with someone cheaper? They have no idea what kind of storm they just invited into their perfectly polished boardroom. My name is Clara Whitmore, and at 34, I'd built something I was genuinely proud of at Barton and Westfield. As executive director of projects for one of Chicago's largest logistics corporations, I transformed our operations from a tangled mess of outdated systems into a streamlined machine that hummed with efficiency. 3 years of late nights, weekend calls, and fighting tooth and nail for every process improvement had paid off. Or so I thought. That Thursday afternoon started like any other. I was reviewing quarterly projections when my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. One of my connections had shared a job posting from Barton and Westfield. Curious. I clicked through, expecting to see some entry-level position or maybe something in our Seattle branch. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. Executive Director of Projects, Chicago office. The description read like someone had copy-pasted my own role directly from our internal documents. Required experience with our proprietary Logistech 3.0 system, the same system I'd personally implemented 18 months ago. Management of cross-functional teams across 3 time zones. Oversight of vendor relationships worth 8 figures annually. Every single responsibility I handled daily was listed there in corporate speak black and white. The salary range made my stomach turn. $60,000 less than what I was making. They weren't just looking for my replacement, they were looking for a bargain basement version of me. I read it again, then a third time, searching for some detail that would prove I was misunderstanding. Maybe it was for a parallel position, a new department? But no, there was only one executive director of projects in our Chicago office, and I was sitting in her ergonomic chair. My first instinct was denial. This had to be some HR mistake. We'd just wrapped up a record quarter, and my performance review 2 months ago had been glowing. Mark Ellison himself, our vice president of operations, had called my work indispensable in front of the entire leadership team. But as I stared at that posting, details from the past few weeks started clicking into place. The sudden exclusion from strategic planning meetings, Mark's assistant asking for copies of all my process documentation for compliance purposes, the way conversations stopped when I entered the break room. I pulled up our internal email system and searched for any communication about restructuring or role changes. Nothing. Then I checked my calendar. My one-on-one with Mark next week had been mysteriously canceled with no explanation. The shock was wearing off now, replaced by something sharper, more focused. They thought they could ease me out quietly, probably with some fabricated performance issue or a restructuring that would coincidentally eliminate only my position. Replace me with someone younger, cheaper, more compliant. Someone who wouldn't push back when they cut corners or ignored safety protocols to save a few dollars. I took a screenshot of the job posting, then another of the timestamp showing when it was published 3 days ago. 3 days they'd been shopping for my replacement while I was in this very office, running their operations, making them money. My hands were steady as I opened a new browser window and began my own search. Not for a new job, not yet. I searched for information about wrongful termination, constructive dismissal, and Illinois employment law. If they wanted to play this game, I was going to make sure I knew all the rules. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across my office when I finally leaned back in my chair. The initial sting of betrayal had crystallized into something else entirely. Determination. They thought I was just another middle manager they could shuffle off the board without consequence. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The next morning, I printed the job posting on the good paper, the heavy cream stock we used for executive presentations. If I was going to confront Mark Ellison, I wanted him to feel the weight of his deception in his hands. His office occupied the northwest corner of the 42nd floor, all glass and chrome with a view that stretched to Lake Michigan. I didn't knock. 3 years of exceeding every metric he'd thrown at me had earned me at least that much familiarity. Mark was on the phone when I entered, feet up on his desk, laughing at something the caller had said. He was 51, with that particular brand of executive confidence that came from failing upward through 3 different companies before landing here. His expression shifted when he saw me. Not guilt, exactly, but the careful neutrality of someone who'd been expecting this conversation. He held up a finger, mouthing 1 minute while continuing his call. I didn't sit. Instead, I stood by his floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city below, letting him see I wasn't going anywhere. When he finally hung up, his voice was all manufactured warmth. "Clara, what brings you up here? Don't usually see you without an appointment." I placed the printed job posting on his desk, right on top of his leather portfolio. "I thought you might want to explain this, Mark." He glanced at it, then laughed. Actually laughed, shaking his head like I'd shown him a child's drawing. "Oh, this? You know how HR is. They're always posting things prematurely. It's probably just a glitch in their system." "A glitch," I repeated, keeping my voice level. That somehow perfectly describes my exact role, responsibilities, and even mentions the proprietary systems I personally implemented. Mark's smile tightened. He picked up the paper, pretending to study it closely. "Look, Clara, I can see why this might be concerning, but you're jumping to conclusions. We're always exploring our options, keeping tabs on the talent market. It's standard practice. Standard practice to advertise your executive director's position while she's still in it." He set the paper down, his demeanor shifting from dismissive to patronizing. "Clara, you're being emotional about this. Nobody's replacing anybody. If there were going to be any changes to your role, don't you think I'd tell you first?" The lie was so smooth, I almost admired it. This was the same man who'd fired our last CFO via email while the poor woman was on vacation. "Of course," I said, matching his fake smile with one of my own. "You're right. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." Relief washed over his face. He thought he'd won, that I'd accepted his explanation and would go back to my office like a good little employee. "Exactly, just a misunderstanding. Tell you what, I'll have a word with HR. Make sure they clean up whatever mess this is." I turned to leave, then paused at his door. "Oh, Mark, I'll be documenting this conversation in writing and sending you a copy. You know, just so we're both clear about the misunderstanding." His expression froze. That's really not necessary. "Clara?" "Standard practice," I said, echoing his earlier words. "I'm sure you understand." "Oh, and I'll be following up with HR directly too, just to help clear up that glitch." The moment I left his office, I pulled out my phone and composed a quick email to someone I'd kept in touch with since my early days at the company, Patricia Reeves, an independent consultant who advised the board on operational matters. We'd worked together on a supply chain crisis 2 years ago, and she'd been impressed with my handling of it. "Patricia, I need to discuss something sensitive regarding leadership decisions that may impact company operations. Are you available for a confidential conversation?" Her response came within minutes. "Free this evening, 7 p.m., Palmer House Lobby Bar. Come alone." I spent the rest of the day acting normal, attending meetings, reviewing reports, responding to emails. But I also quietly forwarded key documents to my personal email. Contract agreements I'd negotiated, performance reviews, commendations from clients. If Mark thought I'd go quietly into that good night, he was about to receive an education in exactly who he'd decided to cross. At 4 p.m., I received an email from Mark. "Clara, spoke with HR. All sorted out. The posting has been removed. Let's put this behind us." I smiled at my screen. He thought removing the posting would make this go away. He had no idea that I'd already archived everything, including the 3 days it had been live, accumulating over 200 applications. "Understood," I replied. "I'll be following up on this matter as discussed." Let him wonder what that meant. I had a meeting to prepare for. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I transformed my home office into a war room. 3 monitors glowed in the darkness as I systematically combed through 3 years of emails, contracts, and financial reports. What started as self-preservation quickly became something else entirely, a pattern I'd been too busy to notice before. The first red flag was subtle. Purchase orders approved by Mark for vendors that had been blacklisted 2 years ago. Hartley Industrial, flagged for consistent quality failures. Brennan Logistics, dropped after a data breach. Yet here they were, receiving steady payments every month, all bearing Mark's digital signature. I cross-referenced the amounts with our departmental budgets. The numbers were cleverly hidden, split across different cost centers, labeled with vague descriptions like operational consulting or process optimization. Individually, they stayed just under the threshold requiring board approval. Together, they totaled nearly $2 million over 18 months. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling invoice records, delivery confirmations, service reports. Except, there weren't any. These vendors had been paid for services that, as far as I could tell, were never rendered. The Logistech system I'd implemented should have caught this, but someone had been manually overriding the approval workflows. The digital footprints led back to Mark's executive access credentials. At 3 a.m., I found the smoking gun. Brennan Logistics had been dissolved as a company 6 months ago, yet we'd paid them $40,000 just last week. A quick search of the Illinois Secretary of State website revealed the company had been re-registered under a new name, Brennan Solutions, LLC. The registered agent, Catherine Ellison Park, Mark's sister. I leaned back, rubbing my tired eyes. This wasn't just about replacing me with someone cheaper. I was the one person in the company with enough operational oversight to eventually notice these discrepancies. My systematic approach to documentation, the very thing Mark had praised in public, was a threat to his scheme. The Hartley Industrial Trail was even more damaging. The company was now owned by a holding company in Delaware. 3 layers of corporate structure later, I found the beneficial owner, Robert Ellison, Mark's cousin. They weren't even trying that hard to hide it, probably confident that no one would ever dig this deep. I started building a forensic timeline, every transaction documented, every approval tracked, every connection mapped. The evidence painted a clear picture. Mark had been using his position to funnel company money to his family members through shell companies and defunct vendors. By dawn, I had compiled everything into an encrypted folder with multiple backups, one on a cloud service, one on an external drive I'd later place in my bank's safety deposit box, and one on a USB drive I'd keep on my person. But I needed more than just financial impropriety. I needed to understand the full scope of his plan. I logged into our HR system using my executive access and pulled the organizational charts for the past 5 years. There it was, a pattern of strategic eliminations. Every director or manager who'd questioned budget discrepancies or vendor selections had been pushed out within 6 months, restructured, made redundant, or suddenly found their performance lacking. Sarah Martinez in procurement, gone after she flagged unusual payment patterns. David Kim in internal audit, transferred to our Phoenix office, then laid off 3 months later. Jennifer Walsh in finance, her position eliminated in a strategic realignment. I was just the latest target, but I had something the others didn't. I'd caught him in the act before he could execute his plan. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Confirming our meeting tonight. This sounds serious. I typed back. It is. Bring your laptop. You'll want to see this documentation firsthand. The morning sun was streaming through my windows when I finally stopped. 15 pages of evidence, cross-referenced and verified. Financial records, email trails, corporate registrations, and a clear pattern of retaliation against anyone who might have exposed him. I showered, put on my sharpest suit, the charcoal one I wore for board presentations, and arrived at the office at my usual time. Mark passed me in the hallway, offering his practiced executive smile. Clara, hope you're having a good morning. That little misunderstanding all cleared up? I smiled back, matching his false warmth. Crystal clear, Mark. In fact, I'm getting a much better picture of how things work around here. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but he covered it quickly. Good, good, that's what I like to hear. As he walked away, I thought about all those vendors stealing from our company, all those employees pushed out for asking questions. He'd built himself a perfect little kingdom of corruption, confident that his position made him untouchable. He was about to learn that kingdoms built on lies have a tendency to crumble spectacularly, and I was going to be the one holding the sledgehammer. The Palmer House lobby bar was nearly empty when Patricia arrived, her silver hair catching the amber light from the vintage fixtures. At 63, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen every corporate scandal imaginable and survived them all. She slid into the booth across from me, her sharp eyes already reading the tension in my posture. "Clara," she said, ordering a Scotch neat from the passing server. "Your message was deliberately vague. That tells me this is either very serious or you're being paranoid. Which is it?" I pushed a folder across the table. Page 1 is the job posting for my position. The rest is what I found when I started investigating why they want me gone. Patricia put on her reading glasses, her expression neutral as she flipped through the pages. I watched her eyebrows rise incrementally with each revelation. When she reached the Shell Company documentation, she looked up at me over her glasses. "You compiled all this in one night?" "I had motivation," I said, taking a sip of my wine. "Mark made it clear yesterday that I'm being pushed out. I wanted to know why." She continued reading, occasionally making notes in the margins with a Mont Blanc pen. "This is extensive. The Brennan situation alone could trigger a federal investigation. You realize what you're holding here? Evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and systematic retaliation against employees." Patricia closed the folder, removed her glasses, and studied me carefully. "You could take this to the FBI tomorrow. Mark would be in handcuffs by the end of the week." "I could," I agreed. "But that would also tank the company's stock, trigger a massive investigation, and potentially hurt a lot of innocent employees. I'd rather handle this internally first." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You're thinking like a board member. Good. What do you need from me?" "I need someone the board trusts to verify this independently. If I bring it forward myself, Mark could spin it as a disgruntled employee making wild accusations. But if Evelyn Cross were to stumble upon this information..." Patricia's smile widened. Evelyn Cross was the board's newest member, brought in specifically to improve corporate governance after a minor scandal 2 years ago. She had a reputation for being incorruptible and thorough. "Evelyn and I have breakfast every Sunday," Patricia said. "She's been concerned about some budget irregularities but couldn't put her finger on the source." "What a coincidence that you might have some insights to share with her." Patricia took a slow sip of her scotch. "You know, if Mark gets wind of this before the board acts, he'll destroy you. He has allies, resources, and no moral constraints." "He's already trying to destroy me," I pointed out. "The difference is, now I'm fighting back." She reopened the folder, photographing each page with her phone. "I'll need tonight to verify some of these financial trails independently. Can't present anything to Evelyn that I haven't personally confirmed. But, Clara..." She paused, meeting my eyes. "You need to be very careful over the next few days. Men like Mark don't handle threats to their power well. What do you suggest? Document everything, every conversation, every email, every interaction. BCC your personal email on anything important, and start working from home more. Make it harder for him to corner you privately." "Won't that look suspicious?" Patricia laughed, a dry sound with no humor in it. "You think he's not already suspicious? The moment you walked into his office with that job posting, you became a threat. He's probably already planning his next move." She was right. When I'd checked my company email before leaving the office, I'd noticed my access to certain financial databases had been restricted. For system maintenance, the IT notice claimed. "There's something else," Patricia said, lowering her voice. "Evelyn mentioned that Arthur Barton himself has been asking questions about operational efficiency. The old man still owns 40% of the company, and he's not happy with some recent numbers." Arthur Barton, the company founder who'd stepped back from daily operations but still wielded enormous influence. if he was already sniffing around. This could be our opportunity, I said. If the board's already on alert, they'll be more receptive to evidence of corruption. Patricia finished her scotch and stood. I'll call Evelyn tonight. Expect to hear from her directly within 48 hours. In the meantime, keep your head down and your evidence secure. As she turned to leave, she paused. Clara, that move you made, telling Mark you'd document your conversation? That was smart. It put him on notice that you're not going quietly, but it also means he knows you're dangerous. Watch your back. After she left, I sat in the bar for another hour, nursing my wine and thinking through possibilities. Patricia's involvement changed everything. With her credibility and Evelyn's position on the board, we had a real chance of exposing Mark's corruption. My phone buzzed with an email from HR. Mandatory performance review scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. Please prepare documentation of all current projects and transition plans. Transition plans. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. I forwarded the email to my personal account, adding it to my growing file of evidence. Friday was 3 days away. That gave Patricia and Evelyn time to build their case, and me time to prepare for whatever ambush HR and Mark were planning. The server approached with the check. As I signed it, I noticed my hand was perfectly steady, no trembling, no hesitation. 6 months ago, this situation would have paralyzed me with anxiety. But now I felt like a chess player who could see 10 moves ahead while her opponent was still trying to remember how the pieces moved. Mark Ellison thought he was hunting me. He was about to discover he'd been the prey all along. The atmosphere in the office shifted overnight like weather before a storm. Conversations halted when I walked past. My team members avoided eye contact during our morning stand-up. Even the security guard who usually chatted about the Cubs gave me nothing but a nervous nod. By Wednesday afternoon, the Whisper Network had reached me through Amit, one of my senior project managers. He closed my office door behind him, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced with concern. Clara, people are talking, he said without preamble. There's a rumor that the entire projects division is being outsourced to a consulting firm. They're saying Friday's meeting is what? I prompted, though I already knew. That you're being let go and we'll all be reporting to someone new by Monday. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. Amit had been with me for 2 years, solid and dependable. What else are they saying? He shifted uncomfortably. That you've been underperforming, missing deadlines, some garbage about mismanaging the Logistech implementation. The lie was so brazen it almost impressed me. The Logistech implementation had come in under budget and 2 weeks early. We had the commendations to prove it. Amit, I need you to do something for me, I said, pulling out a USB drive. This contains all our project documentation, success metrics, and client testimonials from the past 3 years. Make copies. Share them with the team. If anyone questions our department's performance, you'll have proof. He took the drive, frowning. Clara, what's really going on? Politics, I said simply. But don't worry, things are going to get interesting before they get better. That afternoon, I discovered just how aggressive Mark was becoming. My access badge no longer opened the executive conference room. My reserved parking spot had been reassigned. Small humiliations designed to make me feel my diminishing status. But the real blow came when I tried to access our vendor management system. Completely locked out. The system I'd designed, implemented, and managed was now off limits. I called IT, knowing what they'd say before they answered. Sorry, Ms. Whitmore, the technician said, sounding genuinely apologetic. Orders from Mr. Ellison. He's personally handling all vendor relationships now. Of course he was. He needed to cover his tracks, delete records, modify payment histories. Except he didn't know I'd already downloaded everything. 3 years of fraudulent transactions, all safely backed up where he couldn't touch them. Thursday morning brought a new development. Evelyn Cross stood in my office doorway at 7 a.m. before most of the staff had arrived. She was a formidable woman in her 50s, with the kind of presence that made CEOs nervous. Ms. Whitmore, she said, closing the door behind her. I believe we need to talk. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course, how can I help you? She sat down, placing a leather portfolio on my desk. Patricia Reeves shared some interesting observations with me. I've spent the last 36 hours conducting my own investigation. What I found is troubling. I see. No, I don't think you do. She opened the portfolio, revealing bank statements, corporate filings, and a forensic accounting report. Your evidence was the starting point, but I've uncovered something bigger. This isn't just Mark. There's a network of 6 executives involved in this scheme. The fraud totals over $8 million. $8 million. I'd found $2 million. And thought that was devastating. The board is meeting an emergency session tomorrow afternoon. Evelyn continued. After your HR meeting, coincidentally. We need you to proceed with that meeting as planned. Don't reveal what you know. Let them show their hand. You want me to walk into an ambush? I want them to think they've won, she corrected. Their overconfidence will be useful. Document everything said in that meeting. Record it if possible. Illinois is a one-party consent state. She stood to leave, then paused. Clara, what they're doing to you is unconscionable, but it's also going to be their downfall. Your systematic documentation, your refusal to be intimidated. It's given us what we need to clean house. After she left, I sat staring at the closed door. 6 executives. This wasn't just about Mark protecting his embezzlement scheme. This was a conspiracy that reached into multiple departments. I pulled up our organizational chart, trying to identify the other players. CFO. Possibly, he'd always been close to Mark. Head of procurement. That would explain how the vendor fraud stayed hidden. VP of HR. Is that why my review was being fast-tracked? My desk phone rang. Mark's extension. Clara, could you join me in my office? Bring your laptop. His voice was casual, friendly even. The voice of a man confident in his victory. I grabbed my laptop, making sure my phone was set to record. On my way. His office was full of boxes when I arrived. Not his. Mine. Someone had been to my office while I was out and packed my personal items. A crude power play meant to destabilize me. Ah, Clara, Mark said, gesturing to a chair. I wanted to give you a heads up about tomorrow's meeting. Professional courtesy. Yours, how thoughtful, I replied, sitting down carefully. He leaned back, fingers steepled, savoring the moment. The company is going in a new direction. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately after tomorrow's review. However, we're prepared to offer a generous severance package, 6 months' pay, continued benefits, and a glowing recommendation. In exchange for a standard NDA, non-compete for 18 months, and all company materials returned, including any copies you might have made of proprietary information. There it was. He knew I had evidence and was trying to buy my silence. That's a very generous offer, I said mildly. His smile widened, mistaking my calm for capitulation. I told the board you were a professional, that you'd understand business is business. Oh, I understand perfectly, I assured him, standing to leave. Tomorrow's meeting should be very illuminating. As I walked back to my office, I texted Patricia. They just tried to buy me off. 6 executives involved per Evelyn. This is bigger than we thought. Her response was immediate. Perfect. Let them think they've won. Tomorrow, we end this. Friday arrived with the kind of crisp Chicago morning that usually energized me. Today, though, I dressed with the deliberate care of a soldier preparing for battle. Navy suit, the one that made me look like I belonged in a courtroom. Pearl earrings my grandmother had given me, small touches of armor against what was coming. I spent the morning backing up everything one final time, encrypting files, and sending copies to my personal attorney. At noon, I walked through the office one last time, noting the awkward glances, the forced smiles. They all knew what was happening at 2 p.m. The HR conference room was on the 38th floor, neutral territory. When I arrived, 3 people were already seated at the oval table. Mark, looking smugly satisfied. Jennifer Huang, our VP of Human Resources, avoiding eye contact. And surprisingly, Richard Castellano, our Chief Legal Counsel. Clara, Jennifer began, shuffling papers nervously. Thank you for joining us. We need to discuss some concerns about your recent performance and conduct. I set my phone on the table, screen down, recording everything. Of course. Though I'm curious why performance concerns require the Chief Legal Counsel, Richard cleared his throat. Standard procedure for senior leadership transitions. Transitions, I repeated, not reviews. Interesting choice of words. Mark's jaw tightened, but Jennifer pressed on, reading from a prepared script. Over the past quarter, we've documented several instances of insubordination, failure to follow corporate protocols, and unauthorized access to confidential information. Would you like to provide specific examples? I asked calmly. Jennifer glanced at Mark, who nodded. She pulled out a stack of documents. On Monday, you accessed vendor payment records outside your purview. On Tuesday, you downloaded extensive financial data without authorization. On Wednesday, I accessed systems I've had clearance for since implementing them, I interrupted. Everything within my role as Executive Director of Projects, unless my job description changed without my knowledge. Your attitude has become problematic, Mark interjected, abandoning pretense, questioning leadership decisions, creating a hostile work environment for your peers. Which peers? I asked. Please, I'd like names. Jennifer fumbled with her papers. There were no names. Of course, no complaints, nothing but manufactured accusations. Richard leaned forward. Clara, let's cut to the chase. The company is prepared to offer you a generous separation package. 6 months severance, full benefits extension, and a neutral reference. All we ask is professionalism during the transition. I pulled out my own folder, thick with documentation. Before we discuss separation, perhaps we should review some performance metrics. I began laying papers on the table. Project completion rates, 98% on time, 94% under budget. Client satisfaction scores, highest in company history. ROI on the Logistech implementation, 340% in year 1 alone. Jennifer looked uncomfortable. Mark's face was reddening. Now, I continued, let's discuss unauthorized access. I pulled out more documents. Here are emails from Mark himself granting me executive clearance to all financial systems. Here's the board approval for my oversight of vendor relationships. And here, I placed a printed email on the table. Is Mark's written instruction to audit all procurement processes dated 2 months ago? This is ridiculous, Mark snapped. We're not here to debate. The decision has been made. By whom? I asked. The board? Because I find it interesting that such a significant decision would be made without their input. Richard and Jennifer exchanged glances. They thought the board didn't know. I pulled out my phone, checking the time. 2:47 p.m. Are we waiting for someone else? This seems like an incomplete gathering for such an important meeting. No one else is, Mark began, but was cut off by the conference room door opening. Evelyn Cross entered, followed by Arthur Barton himself. The company founder was 81, sharp as a razor, and looking directly at Mark with an expression that could freeze blood. I hope we're not interrupting, Arthur said, his voice deceptively mild. But the board felt we should be present for any discussions about senior leadership changes. Mark went pale. Jennifer's hands trembled as she gathered her papers. Richard looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Mr. Barton, Mark started. This is just a routine performance review. Is it? Arthur sat down slowly, his eyes never leaving Mark's face. Because I've just come from an emergency board meeting where we reviewed some very interesting financial irregularities. Vendor payments to defunct companies. Contracts awarded to family members. $8 million in fraudulent transactions over 2 years. The room went silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Evelyn placed a thick folder on the table. Mr. Ellison, Ms. Huang, Mr. Castellano, you're all being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building. Jennifer started crying. Richard was already calculating his legal exposure. But Mark was looking at me with pure hatred. You did this, he hissed. No, I replied, standing and gathering my things. You did this. I just documented it. Arthur stood as well, extending his hand to me. Ms. Whitmore, the board would like to discuss your future with the company. We have some ideas about restructuring that could use your expertise. As security entered to escort the three conspirators out, I shook Arthur's hand firmly. I'd be happy to discuss it, Mr. Barton. But first, I believe there are 3 other department heads you need to investigate. Evelyn smiled. Already in progress. We've frozen all their access and accounts. I watched Mark being led away, his empire crumbling in real time. He'd thought he was untouchable, protected by his network of corruption. He'd forgotten that networks can be mapped, documented, and dismantled, especially by someone who built their career on systematic efficiency. The executive boardroom had never felt more electric. 40 minutes after the HR ambush had turned into Mark's downfall, I found myself seated at the massive oak table where decisions affecting thousands of employees were made. Arthur Barton sat at the head, his weathered hands folded, while 7 board members occupied the remaining chairs. Evelyn Cross sat to his right, a stack of documents before her. Ms. Whitmore, Arthur began, his voice carrying the authority of 5 decades in business. What you've uncovered goes deeper than vendor fraud. Mark Ellison was running what amounts to a criminal enterprise within our company. Evelyn opened her laptop, projecting spreadsheets onto the wall screen. Based on Clara's initial findings and our forensic accounting team's deep dive, we've identified systematic theft totaling $8.3 million. 6 executives were involved, creating shell companies, approving fictitious services, and eliminating anyone who asked questions. The FBI, I asked, will be notified Monday. Arthur confirmed. Our legal team is preparing everything now. But first, we need to discuss immediate operational concerns. Board member Harrison Wells, whom I recognized from annual reports, leaned forward. Your documentation wasn't just thorough, Clara. It showed a pattern of retaliation against whistleblowers that exposes us to significant legal liability. How many employees were wrongfully terminated? I pulled out my phone, checking my notes. At least 12 in the past 3 years. All held positions where they could have discovered the fraud. Sarah Martinez, David Kim, Jennifer Walsh, they all raised concerns before being eliminated. We'll need to reach out to each of them, Arthur said, making notes. Offer reinstatement, back pay, damages, the works. He looked up at me. Would you be willing to lead that effort? That depends on what capacity I'd be acting in, I said carefully. Arthur smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from him. How does Executive Vice President of Operations sound? Mark's position, but with expanded oversight of compliance and internal audit. The room went quiet. It was a massive promotion, jumping 3 levels of hierarchy. The board voted unanimously. Evelyn added, your handling of this crisis, your systematic approach, your integrity under pressure. It's exactly what we need to clean house and rebuild trust. I thought about the past week, the sleepless nights, the careful documentation, the constant anxiety of not knowing if I'd have a job come Monday. What about the other conspirators? Richard Castellano is already negotiating a plea agreement, Arthur said with satisfaction. He's providing everything, emails, recordings, bank records. Jennifer Huang broke down completely and confessed her role. The 3 department heads Mark was protecting are being arrested as we speak. Board member Patricia Chen spoke up. There's something else. The FBI agent assigned to the case mentioned that your documentation was the most comprehensive corporate whistleblower file they'd ever seen. They want to know if you'd consider consulting on similar cases. Let's focus on fixing our own house first, I replied, though the offer was intriguing. Arthur stood, walking to the window overlooking the Chicago skyline. Clara, I built this company on principles of integrity and hard work. Somewhere along the way, I let my attention slip, allowed people like Mark to corrupt what we'd built. Your courage in standing up to him, even when you thought you'd lose everything, that's the spirit this company needs to rediscover. There's one condition, I said, causing everyone to turn. The employees who were wrongfully terminated get their full pension contributions restored, plus interest. And we establish an anonymous whistleblower system that reports directly to the board, not management. Done, Arthur said without hesitation. What else? My team, the ones who stayed loyal despite the rumors and pressure, they get promoted. Amit Patel becomes the new director of projects. The others receive raises commensurate with their loyalty during this crisis. Evelyn was taking notes. Consider it approved. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing logistics, legal strategies, and communication plans. When we finally concluded, Arthur asked me to stay behind. You know, Mark thought he was clever, the old man said once we were alone. Building his network, intimidating anyone who questioned him. But he made one fatal error. What's that? He underestimated you, thought because you were younger, newer to executive politics, that you'd crumble. Arthur chuckled. I made the same mistake once, decades ago. Underestimated a young woman who worked in our accounting department. She exposed an embezzlement scheme that would have bankrupted us. What happened to her? I married her, he said with a grin. My late wife, Helen. You remind me of her. That same refusal to be intimidated, that same meticulous attention to detail. As I left the boardroom, my phone buzzed with messages. Word was already spreading through the building. Mark's allies were panicking, while others celebrated the fall of a tyrant. I stopped by my old office, though I supposed it would be someone else's soon. The boxes Mark had packed as an intimidation tactic were still there. I picked up the photo from my desk, the one of my team at last year's Christmas party, all smiling and proud of what we'd accomplished. They'd trusted me to lead them, to protect their interests. Now, with Mark gone and his network dismantled, I could finally do that properly. My phone rang. It was Patricia Reeves. Congratulations, Executive Vice President Whitmore, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Arthur just called me. You've earned this. I couldn't have done it without you, I said sincerely. Oh, Clara. She laughed. I just made a few introductions. You're the one who built the case, stood your ground, and brought down a criminal enterprise. Own your victory. As I hung up, I realized she was right. They'd tried to downgrade me, to push me aside like all the others who'd asked inconvenient questions. But I wasn't one to be walked over. And now, they'd never forget it. The boardroom was empty now except for the lingering echo of Mark's downfall. I sat alone in the space where he'd once commanded authority, where he'd made decisions that destroyed careers and lined his pockets. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished table and through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago sprawled beneath me like a promise of new beginnings. Security had been thorough. Mark's office, once a shrine to his ego with its awards and photos with politicians, was stripped bare within hours. His personal items boxed and labeled, his computer seized by federal investigators, his company car keys confiscated in the lobby. The king's throne sat empty, waiting for someone else to claim it. But I wasn't thinking about Mark anymore. He was yesterday's problem, soon to be the justice system's problem. My phone buzzed. A text from Amit. Team wants to celebrate. Drinks at Murphy's? Give me an hour, I replied. I needed this moment of solitude to process everything. A week ago, I'd been planning my potential job search, updating my resume, preparing for unemployment. Now I was Executive Vice President of Operations, tasked with rebuilding trust in a company that had nearly been hollowed out by corruption. The door opened quietly. Arthur Barton entered, moving with the careful precision of his years. I thought I'd find you here, he said, taking the chair beside me rather than his usual spot at the head. Big thoughts? Trying to wrap my head around it all, I admitted. You know what the real tragedy is? Arthur asked, staring out at the city. Mark was brilliant, could have built something lasting, something meaningful. Instead, he chose the easy path, the greedy path. And for what? Money he didn't need. Power that was already his. He wanted more, I said simply. Some people always do. Arthur nodded slowly. I've seen it too many times. Good people corrupted by opportunity, convinced they're too smart to get caught. He turned to me. You had every opportunity to take his bribe, to walk away with 6 months' pay and your dignity intact. Why didn't you? I thought about it, really considered the question. Because walking away would have meant he won. And everyone who came after me would have faced the same fate. Sarah, David, Jennifer, all those people he destroyed deserved better. The company deserved better. Helen would have liked you, Arthur said quietly. She had that same sense of justice. Couldn't stand bullies, especially corporate ones. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he stood. The FBI will be here Monday morning at 8 a.m. They'll want to interview you first. After that, we announce the restructuring, your promotion, and the full scope of our internal investigation. It's going to be a circus. I can handle it. I know you can. He paused at the door. Clara, don't let this change you. Don't let it make you paranoid or cynical. The company needs your integrity intact. After he left, I made my way down to my old office one last time. The boxes were gone. Someone from my team had unpacked everything, putting my pictures and plants back exactly where they belonged. A sticky note on my monitor read, "We knew you'd win. Amit and the team." I smiled, gathering a few personal items to take to my new office on Monday. The executive suite, Mark's former domain, now mine to reshape. As I walked through the building toward the exit, I noticed the change immediately. People looked me in the eye, nodded with genuine respect, some even smiled. The woman who'd stood up to Mark Ellison and won. The story was already becoming legend, growing with each retelling. Outside, the Chicago evening was crisp and electric with possibility. My team was waiting at Murphy's, ready to toast a victory that was theirs as much as mine. They'd stayed loyal when rumors swirled, kept working when leadership was in chaos, trusted me when I couldn't tell them everything. But first, I had one more stop. I drove to the FBI field office, where Special Agent Rebecca Torres was waiting. She took the USB drive containing my complete documentation, the backup I'd made before giving anything to the board. "This is exceptional work," she said, scanning through it quickly. "Most corporate whistleblowers give us fragments. You've provided a roadmap." "I learned long ago that details matter," I replied, "especially when dealing with people who think they're untouchable." "Mark Ellison certainly thought that," Torres agreed. "He's already trying to negotiate, claiming he was just following industry standards, that everyone does it." "Everyone doesn't," I said firmly. "And those who do should face consequences." By the time I reached Murphy's, my team had claimed the large corner booth. Amit had ordered my usual, a glass of Cabernet that I raised in a toast. "To surviving the storm," I said. "To our fearless leader who brought the storm," Amit countered, and glasses clinked around the table. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I finally let myself feel the weight of what had happened. They'd tried to discard me like an outdated system, to replace me with a cheaper, more compliant version. They'd packed my belongings, restricted my access, spread rumors about my competence. They thought they could just downgrade me. But I'd spent years building more than just systems and processes. I'd built relationships, credibility, and most importantly, an unshakable understanding of my own worth. When they came for me, I didn't crumble or rage or panic. I did what I'd always done, documented, analyzed, and executed with precision. Mark Ellison was facing federal charges. His co-conspirators were turning on each other like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The board had cleaned house, and I was leading the rebuild. They thought they could walk all over me. They thought wrong. My phone lit up with an email from Arthur Barton. Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp. We have a company to save. I smiled, already mentally preparing for the weeks ahead. There would be challenges, resistance from Mark's remaining allies, skepticism from employees who'd learned not to trust leadership, but I'd faced worse and won. They'd tried to push me down, never realizing they were only teaching me how to push back harder. Unfortunately for them, I was never one to be walked all over. And now, they'd never forget it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate justice and standing up for yourself, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. Share your thoughts about Clara's journey. Have you ever faced a similar situation at work? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our next episodes, so don't be shy about sharing them in the comments below.